All right, everybody, I think we're going to get started. Thanks for coming to the final Spotlight series here at the UNC Water and Health Conference. I'm Joe Brown. I'm the Interim Director of the Water Institute, and it's my great pleasure to welcome some folks here today to talk about the Hurricane Helene response in North Carolina. Before we get to introductions and their presentation, I'd like to just mention that we're going to be using Slido for Q&A today, and the QR code is up there. So if you've been at this conference all week, you know how that goes. Enter your questions. You can vote on other people's questions. They can rise to the top, and Kat and I will be down here moderating questions. And a good question is a simple sentence that ends with a question mark. There's also a microphone over here in the middle that y'all can use, so we look forward to your questions and discussion, and welcome to the people online as well. So today I'd like to introduce Larry Michael. Larry Michael is the State Environmental Health Director in North Carolina and Chief of the State Division of Public Health's Environmental Health Section. Before that, he served as the Food Protection and Facilities Branch Head and has held several positions within the division since joining the state in 1999. He's also been appointed to the State Board of Registered Environmental Health Specialist Examiners, Local Health Department Accreditation Board, and the Governor's Food Safety and Defense Task Force. Larry's public health career began at the local level, where he was employed as an environmental health specialist in Lee County. He earned a Bachelor of Science in Environmental Health from East Carolina University and a Master of Public Health from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Larry, raise your hand. Wave to the crowd. That's Larry. We also have his colleague Wilson Mize is the on-site water protection branch head for the Division of Public Health at the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services. Graduate of UNC Chapel Hill, go Tar Heels. Wilson has been involved with the state of North Carolina's private well program since its inception in 2008, playing a key role in statewide implementation. His early experience includes serving as an inspector for the North Carolina Division of Environmental Quality, overseeing wastewater and water treatment plant inspections, single-family spray systems, and managing the ambient monitoring program. He currently chairs the North Carolina Environmental Health State of Practice and serves as the vice chair and board member at the North Carolina State Board of Environmental Health Specialist Examiners. Wilson, welcome. Andrew Blethen is the team leader for the newly created Specialty Wastewater Improvement and Field Training Team. Swift for the on-site water protection branch at the Division of Public Health at the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services. Andrew started his career with the Appalachian District Health Department in 1993 as an environmental health specialist and became the environmental health supervisor in 2007, and then the environmental health director until he retired after nearly 31 years of service. Currently serves as vice chair for the North Carolina Environmental Health State of Practice and has taught environmental health as an adjunct instructor at App State since 2007. Andrew earned a Bachelor of Science in Health Promotions and a Master of Public Administration from App State. Welcome. We are very much looking forward to your presentation describing Helene response, and we really appreciate you being here. The floor is yours. And you can use this to advance slides.
Okay. Is the first slide up there?
Yeah, I think it just goes forward.
Okay. Perfect. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks again, Joe, for the introductions, and more thanks to you to inviting us this afternoon, and I'm really happy to be joined by our colleagues here, and especially Andy, who's actually lives in Boone, North Carolina, in the western part of the state, and experienced what we'll be talking about firsthand. So, but first things first, we're going to just kind of go through and tee some things up, and again, we'll have plenty of time to answer any questions you might have at the end, either live in person or those online. But just to kind of rewind the clock a little bit, 1 year ago today, we were in day 33 of our response to Hurricane Helene. So the impacts of Hurricane Helene in North Carolina began on September 27th, 2024, and the primary thing we dealt with was flooding as a result of the hurricane. So we'll be talking a lot about that. We'll be taking a deep dive into the impacts to the water supply, especially in Buncombe County, Asheville, North Carolina. And Before we do all that, though, I do want to spend just a minute, because I think this will help make things a little more, make sense, is talk about what we do day-to-day in environmental health. Environmental health is a huge umbrella programs, so I thought it might be helpful just to take a minute to talk about what we do day-to-day, because all the response that we are going to be talking about are tied back to our facilities that we have jurisdiction over and that we regulate. So first thing I'll mention is we inspect food establishments across North Carolina. There's about 40,000 in our state. And if you go to a food establishment, I highly recommend you check the rating card. And I would further recommend that you dine at places that have an A. We do have B's and C's. They can still remain open with a B or C, but it's a pretty easy scale. It's a 10-point scale. 90 to 100 is an A, 80 to 89.5 is a B, and 70 to 79.5 is a C. Anything below 70 is immediately closed. But anyway, we do restaurants, lodging facilities, institutional facilities. We also inspect swimming pools, which you think, gosh, why is that tied to a hurricane discussion? September of the year, you're not going to have a whole lot of outdoor swimming, but we have a lot of indoor pools. So again, this still factored into our response. I'm going to take the next two together. We're going to be talking a lot about private wells, and keep this in mind that half of the citizens of North Carolina are served by either a private well and a septic system, on-site wastewater systems. So the picture in the middle is a person doing a soil evaluation, which is the starting point for designing a wastewater system. So again, half our population rely on septic systems and private wells. And with the flooding we're going to be talking about in just a few minutes, you're going to see how these two systems really became inundated and became problematic, and are still problematic, and will be for years to come. And finally, we also have a lead and asbestos program where we focus on remodeling and renovation of facilities with respect to lead and asbestos, and also a childhood lead poison prevention program, which focuses on childhood lead poison prevention and child care centers and schools. So again, all these things factor into our response for anything related to hurricanes, flooding, you name the response. These are our primary focus in environmental health, as well as other needs from the community. So take another little step back before we jump into Hurricane Helene. Just want to talk about, in general, the climate risk assessment for North Carolina. And, we're no stranger to hurricanes, but there's other things we're concerned about here as well. Obviously, sea level rise, and I'm going to take you to the eastern part of the state in just a minute and talk a little bit about that and show you some photos that are illustrate this much better than I can speak to this point. But there's a 99 to 100% probability that we're going to have sea level rise increase. Summer heat index values are also going to increase. That's a 90 to 100% probability, and we see that already. And in terms of annual precipitation, hurricane intensity, severe drought, and inland flooding, all of these 66 to 100% probability that all of those things will increase. One thing related to sea level rise I wanted to talk about just a moment is, beyond what you see on the surface, which I'm going to show you some pictures in a minute, the things you may have seen in the news this past week, beyond what you see on the surface, the concern I have, or one of the concerns I have among many, is the fact of what you can't see. As I mentioned, we have a large population base that rely on on-site septic systems. We had a university do a study a couple of years ago showing that, a couple of decades ago, we had 24 inches of separation between the water table and the nitrification field with the trench that handles sewage. Now we're looking at just inches or maybe not even inches. So again, sea level rise, inland flooding, all that factors into what do you do about septic systems and surfacing sewage in those areas. Not an easy thing to deal with. This is Rodanthe, North Carolina. This particular photo, these houses used to have about 200 feet of beachfront. In the past 5 years, we've lost 27 homes to the ocean in this area, in Buxton and Rodanthe. In fact, this past Tuesday, 5 houses went to the ocean this past Tuesday. So this is increasing with tremendous frequency, and again, another one of those head scratcher things where there's just not a great solution. We're losing 18 feet of beachfront a year in this part of the country. And here's a photo of, again, if you turn on the news any day this week, you'll probably see multiple pictures of different houses falling into the ocean, which is something that's a main problem. Not just the physical debris, but you think about, chemicals and other things that are being in there as well. So there's physical hazards, chemical hazards, there's, biological hazards, a lot of issues, and there's just no easy solution. Last time I was there, one of the primary businesses is moving houses back from the ocean. So I was there, and the property owner was actually moving his home 50 feet back. It was, in fact, it's actually in this photo here. This house that you see on the far right-hand side, they were moving it back 50 feet, which is as far as they could go on that lot without encroaching on the next property. And so I asked the guy, I was like, if you don't mind telling me, I got two questions. One is, how much does it cost? And second, how much time do you think you're going to get out of this? He said it's going to cost about $30,000, and he's hoping to get 5 to 7 years use out of it. So, and this is very common. The house movers, they say they can't keep up with the amount of houses they have to move on the coast. So, again, a problem that has no simple solution at all. Okay, this crazy-looking spaghetti map here is, I started working in the field of environmental health in 1995. So I was kind of interested to see, how many named storms have we had in North Carolina since 1995? So there's 73 named storms, and you can see the majority of them are on the east, on the coastline. And the reason I show this is that we don't have that many on the west, but the ones in the west are so different in terms of the impact and the intensity, especially when it comes to the flooding that we see, the intensity of the flooding, flash flooding, et cetera, compared to those in the east. So I think the photos you'll see here will really kind of demonstrate that very well. So again, this green line, that's actually Hurricane Helene. So just want to spend a moment about my ties to Western North Carolina. I'm from Charlotte originally, been in the Chapel Hill, Raleigh area for the past, since 2004. So, but I do have some ties to Western North Carolina. The first one is my first college stint was in Boone. Went to Appalachian State in 1985, it was 86, 87. And in 1987, there was a snowstorm. We had 87 inches of snowfall in 1987. That was enough for me to transfer to East Carolina. So which is what happened. Now Andy stuck it out there. Andy's been there for how many years? Has been there?
When started in '89.
So so you came right after the snow. You didn't see the snow I saw, but you've seen plenty since then. So, but anyway, it's so I lived in Boone for a couple of years. I've got family in Mitchell County, almost as close to the Tennessee line. Mitchell County, the entire wastewater treatment plant was washed away by Hurricane Helene. It doesn't exist any longer. The case fatality rate was among the highest in this area as well. In fact, I couldn't locate or find family for about 2 weeks after the hurricane. Couldn't connect with them at all. Thankfully, none of them lost their lives. Lost quite a bit of property, but they're all safe. And during the storm, my kids, actually my two girls, lived in Asheville during Hurricane Helene. You'll see a lot of pictures of Asheville. In fact, it's probably going to be the primary focus because that's where a lot of the establishments that you saw a minute ago are located within this particular part of the state. Both of them are good now. They actually were going to school there at the time, and they've both moved since then. So I've been fortunate to have family and ties, and so I've been to Western North Carolina so many times. And when I think about Western North Carolina, I think about like the Lynn Cove Viaduct, which goes around Grandfather Mountain and protects Grandfather Mountain. This is 1,234 feet of bridge. I think 153 precast concrete slabs that built it. So really kind of an interesting thing. So if you've never been to the Blue Ridge Parkway, highly recommend you go there and take a drive. It's well worth your time. I also think about Biltmore Estate. And you're going to see some photos just right below this home in Biltmore Village in just a few minutes that will show the impacts close to this home. Of course, Biltmore Estate's the largest private home in the U.S., and it was built between 1889 and 1895. And the last photo I'll show you of things I think about, this is Chimney Rock. I'll show you some photos of the town of Chimney Rock, right below this particular tourist spot. And then in the distance is Lake Lure, which again was another place that was totally inundated. A lot of movies were filmed in Lake Lure, Dirty Dancing, other movies that you might have heard of. So again, these are areas that you'll see in a few minutes that are look totally different now. So we will start, this is the Hurricane Helene, which came in through the Florida Panhandle on September 26th and spun around western North Carolina for about 4 days, dropped a lot of rainfall, and finally dissipated over the Tennessee Valley. In terms of rainfall, there were measures between like 33 inches. Let me make sure I get this right. So put it down so I don't. Yes, 24 to 33 inches of rainfall in different parts of the state during that particular period, and Mount Mitchell had wind speeds of up to 100 miles per hour. The wind wasn't the major factor for this storm for us. It was really the amount of rainfall and the flooding, as you'll see in just a minute. But I just want to mention the wind speed did factor into some locations. Okay, so this is, if you remember Biltmore Estate I just showed you a minute ago, this is just right down below the large private home. This is Biltmore Village, a lot of boutique shops, a lot of nice restaurants in this area. Some of you may have been there, and it was totally underwater. Here's another photo, same place, Biltmore Village. You can see the height of the flooding there. And just remember the Osaka sign on the far right-hand side. You'll see that again in just a moment. But again, just devastating impacts with related to flooding there. If you remember Chimney Rock I showed you a minute ago, the big rock with the Lake Lure down below. This is Blowing Rock. This is Chimney Rock, the town of Chimney Rock on the left-hand side. And the Broad River overran its banks and just pretty much removed the entire town. So that's the same photo, pre and post Helene. It doesn't exist any longer. So one thing, when Hurricane Helene occurred, we had a lot of people volunteer, which is good. People wanted to help out. People wanted to come and do what they could. And there was a lot of pushback because the roads were blocked. Police weren't letting people past because of this. It was just too dangerous for everybody to run in and do something to help out. There were mudslides, which is much different than we experienced in the eastern part of the state. That's one thing I want to point out, this really, really tremendous factor for western North Carolina hurricanes and flooding. And that makes everything difficult. You know, it's not a safe place to be. You know, these things shift and move at no notice. It makes it difficult to site, septic systems or try to find places to install septic systems. This is I-40 on my left. It's, as you can see, part of the road's gone there. That's I-40. So there's, if you remember the Osaka sign, that's how high the floodwater was. It barely made it out of the floodwater. And in fact, the little restaurant was completely underwater. And so what we find when we go to these restaurants and assess the damage and try to help them reopen, this is what we typically find. I mean, it's not a safe environment. We have to worry about electrical hazards, obviously physical hazards. So again, this is what we work in and try to help them restore and get reopened. And we'll talk a little bit about how we did that for this particular event, because it was a little bit different than we normally do. But this event was different than anything I think I've ever dealt with. Just to give you an idea of the extent of the disaster declaration in North Carolina, these are the counties that were affected. There's about a little over 1 million people in this particular area. There were a couple of outliers. As you see, everyone asked why Nash and Lee County show up. There were some injuries related to the hurricane there, so they actually received some funding, and there was some limited damage, but mainly injuries, and I think some deaths occurred there as well associated with the storm. So, as I mentioned earlier, the primary issue was the water supply and the lack thereof. Not only did the reservoir become contaminated with floodwater and sediment, we also had issues with the water main. 36-inch water main was just totally destroyed in a number of spots in the city of Asheville. And this serves over 160,000 people. And again, this water supply was down, I think, from September 27th to November 18th. It was like 52 days that the water supply was down. Obviously this impacts a lot of the regulated facilities that we have, and the next thing that occurred is we started seeing a lot of water trucks come into that area, which is fine. I mean, this is something that we want to make sure there's some certification to make sure they're obtaining water from a safe source. But a lot of these water trucks came in, no issues. They hooked right into the building, and some of these places could reopen, that we'll talk about in a minute. What was not okay was some of the other things we were finding. We were finding things that we just don't know where they came from. I don't know what this was used for before they took this up to this particular facility. Was there chemicals stored in this? Was it cleaned adequately? I don't know. These things popped up all over the place, and we just didn't know where they came from. It's like a mystery, and we just had to get them removed and make sure a safe potable water supply was being utilized. Same thing for this. I have no idea where it came from. Don't know, but still a mystery. If you know, let me know. I have no idea where they came from. I just know we couldn't use them, and that's was a major problem. Now, some of the immediate challenges that we had was, of course, everybody wanted to help, which is good, but also everybody wanted to help, which was not good. It wasn't helpful at the time. What I mean by that is, we had legislative inquiries, we had media inquiries. How many facilities are affected, how many private wells are inundated, how many septic systems need to be replaced, how much money do you need, when do you need the money? All these questions came pouring into us in just a couple of weeks after the event. And we're still in a response mode. We're trying to just, assess situations and trying to get information. And it's just, these are impossible questions to answer. And it was a lot of pressure on us to try to come up with a number. Thankfully, Wilson's going to talk a little bit about this. We were able to lean on some academic institutions to help us out with some modeling that provided some sense of an answer. But one thing we learned about this, and I knew this before the event, but is even more so during the event, is our Achilles heel in environmental health at the state level is the fact that we just have very poor data. It's been an ongoing issue. This really highlighted it a lot for us, and we've kind of used this as a jumping off point to say, hey, we really need some help, and we need some more funding and some abilities to update our antiquated systems that we have. So, but anyway, this really highlighted the fact that we just couldn't provide these answers as they were needed. Communication was an issue because remember, a lot of the phone lines were down. We couldn't contact people in the counties who were doing the assessments that we really needed information about to provide the help that they needed. So communication was just a difficult issue. So our focus in the beginning was really to open the critical facilities, make sure hospitals could continue to operate safely, nursing homes, other institutional facilities, all those types of places we want to make sure that they could remain open and operate safely. So the way we handled a lot of these facilities is come up with emergency operation plans. Now, in previous hurricanes, or previous events, doesn't have to be a hurricane, any flooding event or an event when an establishment is closed due to flooding or a power outage, et cetera, we've always said you've got to meet all the standards before you reopen. That's been the way we've done it, and it's usually not that hard to do with a little bit of help and assistance. This was a situation where we knew there was not going to be any water for 52 days, or at least close to that time period. We didn't know then how long it would last. So we knew the water supply was not going to be up. So we knew that saying you had to have a permanent potable water supply was just not going to be an answer that was going to float. There was a lot of pressure to reopen establishments. They wanted to help out their community, obviously, but this is also the livelihood for a lot of people. They needed to open their restaurants and child care centers, et cetera, to maintain their living. So we came up with what we call an emergency operation plan. And and I'll also credit CDC, ATSDR. They really helped a lot when we kind of talked through how we were going to do this. Again, they were so helpful, and I hope the CDC folks are back with us soon. So what we did is we try to focus on things that are really, really critical. So number one, they had to have a power supply. They had to have a potable water supply. It did not have to be a permanent hookup, but they had to have a potable water supply, either through a water tanker or some other source that had some certification showing the source was approved. And then they couldn't have any sewage backing up into the facility, and they couldn't have any sewage standing on the premises. So those were kind of like the key things. You can see this a pretty exhaustive list of other things on there too, but I'm just trying to point out some of the major things that probably tied into any type of facility that we put together an EOP for. We did this for schools, we did this for child care centers, even tattoo artists. Tattoo artists were trying to get reopened during this time. So any type of facility that we regulated, we put together an EOP so they could utilize this and kind of open up on their own with their own merits. And we would try to get staff out there as soon as we could to assess and make sure everything was okay. So Asheville, the city of Asheville has 1,122 food establishments. And you can see we visited those establishments more than once. And we had over 908 emergency operation plans approved during, I would say, probably the first 3 or 4 weeks of this event. So I think I have 2 slides left. Wastewater disposal, again, that's another major factor. A lot of municipal systems were out, and we're not going to be restored for some time. And as I mentioned, half the population is served by on-site septic systems. A lot of cases, the entire parcel was missing, So could you do a repair? The soil topography was totally different. Could you actually install a system like they had before? Lots of questions had to be answered, and we're still in that phase, in some cases, trying to deal with this issue. There are a number of law changes. I think Wilson's going to address some of those, so I'll skip through that now. But we're really fortunate to have the team that we do at the state level, and also rely on those at the federal level that we worked with. Again, CDC, ATSDR was one of the primary agencies we worked with. We have a number of registered environmental health specialists that came from other areas of the state, mainly the eastern part of the state, that were deployed in the west, so 107 volunteers. And I think one of the most successful things we came up with, and again, I'll credit Wilson with working on this, is the direct-to-consumer sites for well disinfecting and well sampling. That was a major factor, again, with trying to restore water supply to a lot of businesses and people, and that's one of the programs that we came up with. And now I believe I'll turn things over to Wilson to kind of tell you the rest of the story.
How are we doing today? So again, Wilson Mize, on-site water protection branch head. So I've been over the private well program since it started, since legislation was passed in '06, basically stating that every county had to have a private permitting and inspection process for drinking water wells. So Larry's kind of given the holistic picture from our environmental health section of what we do, and I'm going to get more into the weeds of the private well water quality, some of the public water quality issues we dealt with, as well as wastewater concerns. So there was obviously extensive damage. Roads and bridges were isolated, so we couldn't even get to communities in the beginning. As Larry said, he couldn't get up with his family for several weeks. There was no good way to access some of these areas because in the mountains, obviously, in many cases, there's one way in, one way out. So there's just ease of access was extremely difficult. And Andy's with us. He was actually in the county at that time. He's since come to the state, but he was boots on the ground. You'll see his picture in multiple videos and slides today because he was out assisting well owners right after the storm, helping them disinfect and get their water supplies back online. It's already been mentioned there were a significant amount of landslides. Don't know how well you can see it, but you can see part of the pipe at the top right. That's where a septic system was, and it's not uncommon for the landslide to occur where the drain field is because there's already moisture in the ground, there's soils that aren't compacted, so it's not uncommon. So as Larry mentioned, there's a lot of people that hope and wish to rebuild in their current properties. That may not be the case. We may not have soils anymore, or the soil that was there has been dispersed somewhere else, and now we're down to bedrock. Or the pictures he showed of the Bat Cave area outside of Lake Lure, as he mentioned, there were homes, septic systems right along the river. Those systems are in the river now. Their back porches are on the edge of the river. So there is no land in some of these areas to be able to build back. But one of the top priorities for my group was dealing with flooded and damaged wells. And this was, Larry put it a good term that I've probably used in multiple talks after Hurricane Helene. This was just different. I'm used to countless hurricanes down east. We have flooding. The flooding resides. We disinfect the wells. We get them back online. It wasn't the level of destruction like we've seen here, where we've lost entire municipalities' wastewater and water systems. And they're turning to us for temporary solutions, which can be difficult because we only have so much responsibility when it comes to certain schools or daycare centers, and I'll kind of touch on that in a minute. But you can see from the pictures, I think Andy took the picture on the left, the well in the middle of the creek now. That was not the case prior to Helene. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it still worked, correct? They had power running to it. They could actually access water out of that well. But in many cases, the casing was either broken off, it was demolished. On the right, you can see how much material. We require the well casing to be 12 inches above land surface, so that bare spot you see at the top right would have been land surface prior to the hurricane. But what we did find, and I'll kind of touch on this at the end of what we learned from this event that we can hopefully be proactive and protect well users in the future, is better protecting the well heads prior to storm. Because this is what we found. Many wells were not either properly sealed, or the photo in the bottom left, our rules require a vent stack in every well. Doesn't completely eliminate surface water from making its way in the well, but it does minimize the amount of water. In this case, with no vent, all the water that flowed over that well ends up inside that well. So for us, we had to assess the who, what, where. Were they shared or private wells? Because we learned something in this case. There's a lot more shared wells in western North Carolina than maybe we were aware of. Not every property wants to drill a well if they have the in-laws next door or the children that built in their same property. We also learned there's a lot more springs in western North Carolina than what we may have estimated. But we had to determine, if we're out there disinfecting a well, we're sampling a well, is it shared? We need to let the neighbor know we're going to be pouring chlorine into your well. So there was a lot of questions that had to be asked throughout this process. Then it was a safety issue. You know, were the electrical wires underneath water? Have they been dried out? Is there a potential for electrocution? Then we tried to work on properly disinfecting wells. And I'll get into the direct-to-consumer site stuff in a minute, because that was a new process for us that I think worked well, and something that we actually attribute to academia and some of the studies they've done in North Carolina with water sampling events. So we kind of mirrored that. So I do think it was beneficial in getting the most amount of wells sampled and disinfected in a timely manner. We provided direct assistance for repair permitting to perform disinfection activities. Many counties don't have the staffing to go out. Where Andy worked, they pretty much went out and disinfected every well that was sampled. And that's always been common practice. But in some counties, they have 1 or 2 environmental health specialists, and they're dealing with opening restaurants and daycares and schools. Some of this stuff has to take a back seat. So we created a way that homeowners could get more involved. So for the springs, users are very loyal. I think Andy will tell you that. No matter how bad that springs looks or how bad that water may be, they do not want to get rid of them. That is just same thing with old bored wells. People want to keep old bored wells even if the water quality is not sufficient. And then disinfection of the reservoir only. So for these, they're not always easily disinfected like a drinking water well. So trying to establish a protocol on how to treat these springs, we found somewhat difficult in the beginning. And then funding was also difficult. A lot of the funding options are to replace or repair damaged wells, but did not apply to springs. So our top priority was ensuring that those well owners that were still in their homes or were attempting to get back in their homes could have safe, potable water by the time they got back there. So what we did is we created direct-to-consumer sites where the state provided disinfection materials. We would have stations set up at each local health department. I believe we ended up with 11 or 12 that took on this project. And the homeowner could come in and pick up a 5-gallon bucket. They could pick up bags of disinfection materials, funnels, hoses, everything they needed to circulate the disinfection, to measure how much disinfectant they need, and basically properly shock chlorinate that well before purging it and collecting water samples. This is just a photo. My staff, I was at the state lab on a Saturday all day loading up state vans. I had staff come in at 4 a.m. on Monday and make the trek out west. And as I said, it was very difficult to get to some of these locations. I think one of my staff had spent 16 hours, I think, going out to Cherokee County because there was no direct route. 40 was closed. They had to go down into South Carolina. So it was a lot of work just to implement these direct-to-consumer sites. Already mentioned, our goal was to create a way that you could safely get drinking water, and we provided instructions, video tutorials on how to handle this process. But this is what it looked like, and there were many a health department that were just inundated with buckets, and I still have a lot of buckets. So if anybody needs 5-gallon buckets, let me know. I think we ordered a few too many. And so it was a process because our people at the state had never been through this. So just trying to educate them on what products we need for disinfection. We might get a shipment of something and it wasn't adequate. So there was a delay there, but there were other groups. Health Directors Association had materials donated. I've got a close working relationship with all the well contractors in the state. One of their organizations out of Texas donated, I think it was almost 800 pounds of calcium hypochlorite solution to disinfect wells. So there were a lot of people involved with this process. One of the groups Larry mentioned earlier where we have no data that's been helping us with data, we've been doing grant work with Northeastern University for years now, and it's a project through NASA, basically how to map where wells and septics are in North Carolina. And the whole goal behind this was originally wells, not septic, but we've kind of pushed that area there as well because, as Larry mentioned, we don't have data, at least at the state level. You can pretty much get it county by county because they're the ones issuing the permits. They're the one keeping those records in-house, but many still do it on paper. They don't use an application like CDP or something that you can go in and actually retrieve that data from a database. So they've been helping us, and I'll show you kind of what they've helped build for us. It's not complete yet, but their students actually came down because they wanted to be involved. So what they did was they went to one of my well contractors who donated the materials and made mock well heads that were actually at all the direct-to-consumer sites so somebody could demonstrate this is where your vent should be, this is how to remove the vent, this is how to hook the water hose and put it back through the well seal. So we actually were able to do kind of a hands-on tutorial when you came and picked up the products to disinfect your well. Already mentioned springs. There were more encountered than I believe any of us expected. And again, FEMA was not providing funding for spring repairs, and in many cases, there's not a lot you can do other than clean them out, try to disinfect them. If there's a water quality issue, you could install ultraviolet light, but they're limited when it comes to repairs. There's Andy again before he came to the state. So what we did is we worked with Northeastern. They basically videoed Andy collecting water samples, disinfecting wells. So we not only had paper documents we could hand out to residents, but we could also provide them with a link where they could go, because some people do much better with a video than reading the instructions. So they could go on and see exactly how to sample and disinfect their well. Because with those direct-to-consumer sites, we not only provided you with the disinfection materials, we provided you with the water sample kit and directions on how to do that. And we want to make sure it's as accurate as possible. And we gave chlorine test strips because we want to make sure there's no residual chlorine before collecting the water sample. And then it got very convoluted because we also had to make sure that the water samples made their way back to Raleigh in time. So I'll discuss how we used a few mobile labs. As you can see, we ended up with almost 3,000 total water samples, which is fairly significant. Even after some of our larger hurricanes down east, we might have 1,100 or 1,200. These are provided by the North Carolina State Lab at no cost. They ship the bottles to the counties. But as I mentioned in the past, it was understood that the county would come out and collect those water samples. It's just always been common practice. But due to staffing and the area, the width and length of the area that was affected here, there was no way that the counties could get out there and collect these in a timely manner. So we established there were 2 EPA mobile labs that assisted with this process. That's why you see the data somewhat broken up. The EPA lab actually analyzed over 1,500 samples. And that's because they have one set up just outside of Asheville, so that encompassed all of Buncombe County and surrounding areas. And we have one set up at Andy's office in Watauga, which was another one of the more heavily hit areas. So they were able to access those. There was no concern with hold times, getting samples back in time. They dropped them off at the health department that afternoon. They generally had the results back within a day or two. So that helped us tremendously. Then we also had supporting labs. So there were counties that neighbored these other counties that have in-house county labs, whether it be at the water department or some analyze their well samples in-house as well. So they were able to take those to an adjoining county and not worry about meeting the courier in time to get those samples back, because they have to be shipped from the mountains all the way back to Raleigh. Larry had mentioned we had a lot of issues with reopening daycares, schools, and generally that would not be an area that I would be involved with or my branch would be involved with, because very few are on, well, none are really on individual wells. Generally they're going to be a public water supply well, a non-transient, non-community well. So we're not involved in that aspect. Some are on septic, but they're on large systems, so again, not as heavily involved. But in this case, we were having schools, especially in Buncombe and other counties, putting in emergency backup drinking water wells. And I had a lot of concerns with that, because by statute, we don't permit those. They're not by definition a private drinking water well, so it's not something that the local health department would permit. But then I go to public water supply and they say, well, it's temporary. If it's not used 61 days or more, it's not a public water supply. And most schools were saying, we're going to have water within a couple months, so we're just going to use this 45 days. So it was kind of a gray area. And we had a lot of concerns, kind of like the Flint, Michigan issue we had years ago, where now we're going from treated surface water to groundwater, and we don't know the plumbing conditions in many of these schools. So there were a lot of concerns. So there was a bill passed that actually put provisions there to protect those water supplies. You had to identify how long you were going to use it, what kind of treatment you were using, you had to sample it periodically, and had that not been passed, in theory, anybody could have drilled that well. Nobody confirms the construction or setback locations, and then nobody was sampling them. It wasn't required. So that did take away a lot of our fears. We also had a permit extension, so for those homeowners up there that maybe had applied for a permit for a septic system 2 years ago and only have 3 years left on that permit, they extended those out for a total of 10 years. So they tried to do things to help these homeowners during this event to kind of give them more time to get back on track. Our department assisted in the development of 14 guidance documents that each were translated and posted online, whether that was, restaurant related, daycare related, how to disinfect your well, how to get your septic system back up and running. I can't tell you how many meetings we had. I felt like we were on meetings from sun up to sundown, many weekends. They just seemed to never end. But that's what we're here for. We support the county. So when the local health departments need us, that's our top priority. And we participated in hundreds of local health department public health coordination meetings in all areas of public health, and participated in hundreds of public health coordination calls within the state public health to coordinate response and recovery. And as Larry mentioned, we sent a lot of local health department staff out there to help. And I can't tell you how much the counties appreciate that, because these are people that are well-versed in on-site wells, food and lodging programs, and they're able to come in and kind of hit the ground running and help these counties, or in some cases, they just went and manned the direct-to-consumer sites, and then the local health department staff could get out and handle kind of the majority of the issues. There was a tremendous amount of coordination between communicable disease, environmental health, OEB, and DHSR. We conducted assessments of skilled nursing, assisted living facilities, mental health homes, family care homes. We provided guidance on mold, restoring water and Legionella risk, cleaning and disinfecting, well and septic system repair, and as Larry already mentioned, assisted with reopening food establishments, daycares, and schools. And that was a tremendous undertaking. I mean, we had daycares asking if they could use 5-gallon buckets of water out of the creek to have their facility back open. And, we don't want to say no. We don't want to say yes, but then you get the political pressure, and that's where they had to come up with solutions to get people back, because people need to get back to work. Without a daycare open, they don't have anywhere for their kids, so it's kind of a trickle-down effect, and the same goes with schools. We had to get the schools back open as soon as possible. So what are some of the next steps that we learned from this? Hurricane Helene's impact underscores the need for comprehensive disaster preparedness and resilient infrastructure. That's kind of the top priority. If you look at the funding that DEQ has received for repairing or replacing septic systems, you have to show how that repair or that new system will be more resilient to flooding. So we're on the right track. The problem is, in many of these areas, I don't know that there's much that could have been done. I don't care how high up the mountain you put it, where you put it. In some of these areas, no matter what we try to do to prohibit or prevent this, if this same storm happens again, you're likely to have the same repercussions. It has been a collaborative effort among government agencies, communities, and individuals are essential to enhance resilience against future disasters. Over $1.65 billion in federal block grants have been allocated. So some of the lessons learned, and this is more from the water quality side, the well water side. Pre-flood wellhead protection is crucial. In those photos I showed you, if these wells had been covered in plastic, duct taped, wrapped up, sealed so that some of that surface water didn't make its way in, we wouldn't have seen quite the water quality concerns that I think we did. Rapid post-flood sampling and testing, early collection because they want to get back in their homes. And some of our numbers, if you saw that slide that showed the percent of total coliform versus the percent of E. coli, the total coliform is pretty consistent with what we've seen after majority of hurricane or flooding events. We tend to see it in that 30-some-odd% range, which isn't far off from what we see for new drinking water wells. So that number has always remained pretty consistent, but what you did see is a much larger increase in E. coli or fecal matter in the wells. So there was definitely an indication there was surface water making its way in. So we want to sample those quickly. And some of those numbers are skewed as well because Buncombe County sent out a news blast stating that get your well sampled for free. We're not going to turn anybody down, but we know in some of these areas a lot of wells were sampled that likely were never flooded, which is fine, but that kind of skews our numbers as far as if we're looking at wells that were flooded. And then access to emergency disinfection supplies. That was kind of the biggest learning curve I saw here. We were able to provide those products for direct-to-consumer sites, but it oftentimes took weeks, if not months, to get some of those products or items in. So just having that stuff ready in the event of a storm so counties aren't having to wait on that, I think is crucial moving forward. Flexibility in permitting wells and septic systems because everything is not as it appeared before the storm. Everything is somewhat may contradict what the rules say, and we even did stuff with affidavits allowing temporary homes to connect to an existing septic system without us inspecting it. Because if we go out there and find problems, we're not going to let you connect to it. By you signing that affidavit, it essentially gives you a year to put some sort of temporary home there, utilize that system, and try to bring everything up to par before we come inspect it. Public education and long-term well maintenance. That was another big one. We do host for the local health departments about every 2 to 3 years an emergency preparedness conference where we go over a lot of these materials. But I think that'll change because we've generally always taught it at the coast, and it was always dealing with coastal plain-related flooding issues. And again, this opened our eyes to a lot of things maybe we didn't consider prior to this flooding event. But the biggest one to me was data tracking and mapping of impacted sites. We just don't know where they are. And as Larry mentioned, we were constantly being asked, how many homes have been affected? How many wells? How many septic? We just don't have that data. And even at the county level, I mean, by law, we did not start permitting wells until July 1 of 2008. So the county had very little involvement with drinking water wells. So they don't have records prior to 2008 unless it's the handful of counties that already had local well rules like Orange, Durham, Wake. There are a handful that were already permitting wells. But due to the lack of data we had, we actually reached out to Northeastern because of the project, the Hurricane Helene surveillance project we've been doing with NASA. And what we asked, let me get to this. We asked, basically they reached out to us, we reached out to them on September 27th to create an estimated flooding extent map that shows us the areas that were most heavily flooded, and then try to pick out, and this project actually grew, we tried to pick out where well and septic are. And you can do that fairly easily. I mean, it's those fringe areas just outside of municipalities that don't seem to be as accurate, but you get outside where the water lines are, sewer lines, it's pretty easy to determine those homes at least are not on public water. It may be a shared well, maybe a spring, but they were able to launch and create this tool for us by October 3rd. What they showed us was private well estimates by block. So we looked at different areas where the flooding occurred, where the most wells are, and basically it enables the county to kind of fine tune where they want to provide more assistance. So this gives us the ability to say, well, we don't need to go to these portions of the county because they're either on municipal water or there's very few homes there with wells. And this allowed us to kind of pinpoint with some sort of accuracy where we should focus our efforts. Don't know how well you can see that. And these numbers are slightly skewed because obviously this project is still a work in progress. But it tried to identify by county, and these are basically the majority of the counties we dealt with after Helene, how many wells are within the county, how many well users, how many were within the flooded area, and how many were within 100 meters of flooded areas. So it gave us a number that we could provide the legislature, or we could provide department heads at DHHS, and at least gave us a talking point to start with. And then they took it another step and showed us where shelters were located, where fire stations were located, where schools were located. So we were able to, again, kind of focus our efforts in these areas that we knew were most vulnerable, were the most heavily hit, and maybe had susceptible people, whether it was a nursing home or restaurants, and they even mapped restaurants for us. So here's another example where they looked at businesses and organizations. You can see childcare, gas stations, grocery stores, restaurants, and this is, I believe, for all the counties, so it breaks it down within the affected counties. And it just shows us where the known sources or least of contamination are too, because our sampling event was just for bacteria. But there were many a homeowner that were concerned with all the surface water and what was surrounding those properties. Should I be sampling for VOCs or other water quality parameters? So this would enable us to say, yes, you might want to sample for metals because you're near a landfill or something of that sort. We obviously put a lot of this on our website where we urged well and septic safety following Hurricane Helene. And these resources are still on there. So they're documents as well as videos on how to disinfect, how to assess the damage of your well, whether you have a bored well, a 2-inch diameter well at the coast, a 6-inch drill well in the west or Piedmont, or a pitless adapter. So it shows you different methods of disinfecting and accessing those wells. Again, it shows you how to sample. So what we're working on with them is building a statewide geodatabase, and I believe there's other universities building similar tools that I'm aware of. But basically, they're looking at NC1 map, NCDEQ, the census. And if you're not familiar, DEQ created our group, what's called the Well Permitting Decision Tool years ago. If you're ever dealing with well water, groundwater issues, it's an excellent tool because you can type in the address that your well is on, and it'll show you within 1,000 feet of any known source or release of contamination. So we're trying to access that data and put it in there as well. It's also looking at our state lab data. So we're trying to track trends throughout the state where we're seeing water quality issues similar to the arsenic in Iredell County in that area. We want to see, and we're starting to DEQ's finally starting to include PFAS into that tool so we can, and it enables us when we issue new well permits to make property owners aware that there's concerns on neighboring properties. There may have been a spill here. There may have been underground storage tank leak, things that we can bring to their attention to better safeguard that end user. And we're probably going to house this on our North Carolina State of Practice site that I chair, and that way counties can go in and access this tool and find after a storm event or before a storm event where they should be focusing their efforts. But in summary, we had 104 fatalities, 4.6 million citizens in affected counties, close to 60 billion in damages in climbing. Estimated 73,000 homes have been affected, and it's 10 plus years at least of recovery. It's going to take a long time. But I believe that's all the slides we have, and I think we'll open it up for discussion.
Thanks very much, gentlemen. We've got a number of interesting questions here online. The mic in the center of the room is also open if anybody wants to ask questions. Let's see. Oh, there's the QR code's up there too, so it's not too late to submit questions. Let's see, where can we start? There were a few questions about working with communities and communicating with communities in crisis. So could you talk, you mentioned a little bit about working through the health departments and some of the programs that y'all had. Are there trust issues? Are there other things that complicate that work? And can you maybe talk through some of the complexities around that? Because obviously when people are going through crisis, they're getting information from a lot of places, and breaking through and getting your message across is important.
Test, okay. Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, thanks for that. And I've thinking back over the many different emergencies and disasters I've responded to going back. I think the first one I remember is Hurricane Floyd back in 1999, and so many since then. But the one thing I've found is that in terms of trust, I believe citizens within the community trust the people they know the best, which the local health department, different community groups, et cetera. So our job is to really reach out, work with community groups, work with faith-based organizations, work with the health department. Because if I show up and say, hey, I'm from Raleigh and I'm here to help you, that doesn't go over so well sometimes. So I think it's really important for us to partner with those on the ground, those locally, and make sure we provide the support they need to help their community. And you know, that's been my experience at least, and I'll point to Andy or Wilson if they have anything to add to that.
I would agree with him that the local health department staff live in those communities, so they seem to have a little more trust. Now, I will say, you see a different level of mistrust with the government in the mountains. I mean, you really just have those homeowners that do not want you on their property. But the ones I spent a few days with Andy, I mean, everybody seemed everybody was in such a bad place. They were almost willing to assist or request assistance regardless of where you're from. But we also worked with groups, River Keepers, to help spread the word about water sampling. We work with some churches. So we're able to use other entities within the community to hopefully build that trust.
Yeah, and well, I'll just add from the local perspective, you know, the local health department environmental team is in the community. And yes, we're regulatory in nature, but we still have built a relationship with a lot of the restaurant owners, especially. The first 3 or 4 days was a lot of doing facility inspections because, as Larry and Wilson pointed out, in the coastal plain floods, the waters recede pretty quick. The topography is flat, not as many forests to deal with, but there are some people 5-6 months out that are just now getting back onto their properties due to the loss of private bridges, building roads back. So our food and lodging staff did a lot of work up front, and you could really tell the years of diligence on their end to get to know the operators, to work with them. Yes, we're regulating you. You may not like your grade. You may not like this new process in the rules, but they saw us more as a help getting out there, working with them to get them up and running, because after a snowstorm or any type of loss of power, people want civilization if you've been without it. And so I think for local health departments to build relationships with the community and other community partners is critical, because there is a mentality in the mountains. I don't know how many times I heard it, that, well, I want to keep my spring because it's my water. If I drill a well, the government is going to come take it. And you just can't dispel that kind of feeling overnight. So I think it's critical for the local health departments to really focus on, yes, doing our jobs, enforcing public health rules and laws, but also doing it in a way that is respectful and working with our communities to build those partnerships. So when something like this happens, we are part of the solution and not looked upon as part of the problem.
Mark Sopsey, UNC Chapel Hill. Nice to see you again, Wilson.
You too.
So a number of groups, one in particular, Ruth Ann Velma's group, contacted me because they were a consortium of groups that got together to try and respond with all good intentions. And I guess I tried to help them as best I could from a distance. I guess my question is, were groups like that more helpful, or were they more a hindrance, or how do you sort out the well-meaning groups that want to help in a situation like this?
That's a tough one. Honestly, after a storm, you want as much help as you can get. As Larry said, I'm still going to counties out west, and there's still rooms full of water. And there were tons of donations, probably more than was necessary at the time, so everybody wanted to help. And I would get calls from most of those groups at least wanting to be on a meeting to discuss how they could help, because there's a lot that want to provide sampling. There were groups from Texas and other states coming in wanting to provide sampling. And basically, we like to be aware of it so we have a consistent message, because we have certain details and criteria we have to provide for water samples with our health risk evaluations. And one of the problems you have sometimes with researchers or other organizations coming in is it's not the same message, or there is no message. There's some that will come in, collect water samples, leave the state, they get the data they need, but then we're left with the after effects. We're left explaining the results, because the county or my group is going to get that call if there's a water quality issue. But I would say for the most part, the groups that were involved with this current storm did a fairly good job. I don't think many of them got the level of involvement that they had hoped. I think because we were out there immediately, we were out there collecting water samples, but I think it could be done well. I think having the state and some county involvement instead of just coming in and wanting to save the world is ideal, because there needs to be other input before they do something.
One more question. I know you said the logistics were challenging to try and get samples back to Raleigh or any other designated laboratory you could find. Does this suggest there may be a need for better laboratory capacity in the western part of the state?
I have jokingly made that comment to the state public health lab multiple. It's always an issue for my most extreme counties, because they're sending water samples to the state lab generally Monday through Wednesday, and some of those samples have a 24-hour hold time.
Yeah.
And we learned throughout this event that we have a state courier, but with water samples, they're actually collected in the west, spend the night in Charlotte, then make it to the state lab first thing the following morning. I was never aware of that throughout the history of this program. So they actually take health department samples, like blood or rabies, stuff like that, directly to the lab. So they were actually taking water samples with that courier so that there was no lag time there. But it would, obviously it would take significant funding, but it would be ideal to have a miniature version of the state lab in the east and west, because we have a lot of samples that are sent from the coast or from the mountains that may not make it in time. And then we're having to spend more resources, more manpower to go out and recollect water samples that probably aren't necessary.
I mean, there are university labs out there and probably other labs that might be accessible, but they're not certified.
That's the
part of the
issue.
problem.
I've yet to find a university lab that's state certified, and our regulations require that the samples be analyzed at a state certified lab. So that is one of the holdups for sure.
Is there a straightforward protocol for getting labs like that certified that they can
It's
follow?
through the state lab. And now I do take that comment back. So for something such as this, the requirement to use a state certified lab is only for the first sample for a newly permitted and constructed well. So yeah, absolutely. University labs could have been used for this event because there are no requirements for existing well samples.
Okay. Well, thank you.
One thing I'll mention, and Wilson could probably add to this, is during this particular event, we did have EPA labs, like remote labs set up.
Yep.
And I think some of the larger counties like Buncombe, I believe they have their own in-house labs. So there was, beyond the state lab, we had some other assistance.
Okay, thank you.
This is the water, oh, sorry. We're gonna go one online and then we'll go back to the microphone. Is that okay?
Oh, that's great.
Because we've got like a bunch of questions online. And yeah, don't forget everybody, you can vote on the ones that are online and use the QR code. So this is the UNC Water and Health Conference. There's a lot of health people here. What types of health issues have been related to the damage specifically around water and sanitation infrastructure? Where are the data gaps? And what do you know about that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much I can speak to that because I don't know that we've received any data as far as illnesses or hospital visits or gastrointestinal concerns. So I wouldn't have numbers for that currently, and I'm sure somebody at our agency tracks that, but I've yet to see that.
If there's an enterprising PhD student who can get access to emergency room data, that sounds like a good project. Go ahead, please.
No, I was just saying, I mean, when you have a flooding event, I mean, there's anything and everything's in the water. Things go in the water reservoir. So I think there's just, I mean, the sky's the limit in terms of concerns. I mean, there's, beyond biological threats, there's chemical threats. So it just runs the gamut of issues that we deal with. I mean, obviously, communicable disease is where our focus is. We want to make sure, going back to the establishments that we regulate, that, any type of flooded food is not used, in any circumstances. And again, just going back to the typical things we face in communicable disease related to waterborne illness and other issues is what we have our flag up for, I guess, so to speak. But Wilson's right. We've not seen any good ED data or other type of data that really suggests any type of trend that we've seen in this particular event.
No outbreaks, for example, that you can link to this. Okay.
Thanks so much for your presentation. My question is related to the municipal drinking water treatment plants and systems. Do you have any, or can you comment on how many of those, went down and how long it took to get them back online, and what interim measures you used before they were back online? You showed a picture of a tanker truck coming in. Yeah, thank you.
I'll start out, and maybe Wilson can add to it. The one that we dealt with the most was the city of Asheville, the municipal water plant there that was out again 52 days. That one really, again, served 160,000 individuals and businesses that had the most, far-reaching impact in terms of this event. And centralized water treatment systems and even the wastewater treatment plants are under DEQ. So we work closely with our sister agency. We're in DHHS. We work closely with them to try to problem solve and deal with establishments that we knew were not going to have access to a permanent water supply or a permanent wastewater disposal during this particular time. But I don't know, Wilson, I don't know if you have anything to add to that, or
I would just say I think it was a learning opportunity for Buncombe County especially. I mentioned wells were going in for schools, wells were going in for hospitals, and those were in that gray area. They weren't really regulated by us or DEQ. And there was a strong push years ago down in the eastern portion of the state to put in emergency backup wells for hospitals. And I think maybe this opened the eyes of those in western North Carolina, and now we actually have quite a significant number of wells that could be used as backups for hospitals and schools. So there wasn't that thought in the past. We have municipal water in the city. We don't need wells. So I think that was good, but it was a little too late for this event. I mean, we had people coming from out of state charging over $100,000 for a well for these, a small private school just to get them back into school, and they were willing to pay that because they knew it could be months before they had water. So we kind of have a better plan in place, and I think it's our opportunity to push these emergency, even backup type wastewater systems, because I don't think they were prepared to lose entire wastewater plants.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
One online, and then we'll go back over there. Is that okay? So can you tell us more about the use of springs as a primary water source? How common is this? Are there data on water quality? Are these protected springs? This might be an unfamiliar topic for some people in the room.
Well, I guess being the hillbilly, I'll get the bulk of this. So, in the mountains and maybe to some extent in the foothills, springs are pretty common. And a spring is basically where water is naturally flowing out of the ground. And literally it can be just coming up at the base of a tree or from underneath a rock. And so if you think back hundreds of years when people were migrating down the Shenandoah and coming to the mountains, if you're going to farm, if you're going to live, you have to have a source of water. And so finding a good producing spring, and springs are dependent on surface and rainfall for recharge. So a good spring is something that you would build a farm or a homestead or even a community around. And so there are a lot of people in the mountains that do rely on springs as their primary source. Now, from a public health aspect, this is basically surface water. I've seen it come out of the ground into a black roll pipe straight into the house. You have some that are actually a little more protected, where they've dug down into the earth, if they're lucky down to bedrock, and then constructed concrete boxes and taken time to make sure that surface runoff from upslope from, say, agricultural operations or livestock is not getting into it. And the challenge there is that the source of the water is coming out of the ground, and that is very hard to protect, whereas a drinking water well, especially in the mountains, is coming out of consolidated bedrock, where it's taken maybe decades for rainwater and snow to get down through the soil and get treated, and then through rock and get more treatment. And so the potential for contamination is a lot higher. And with this, they're almost sacred to the owners. They will swear by this spring, generational. And so even if there are health concerns, trying to get people off of that to get onto a well, the resistance was there. And so I think, as Wilson said, we could look at the spring head, offer advice for how to protect it. Other than that, clean out the reservoir, chlorinate it, and hope for the best. There are options for UV and chlorination, but here again, these people are not going to want that chlorination, especially. So it was a trick working with people that wanted to stay on that spring when you knew that it was no longer going to be a viable source.
Thanks. Natalie Exum from Johns Hopkins University. I'm just in admiration of what you shared today and all of the work that, it's not been that long, and so, this is only a year ago. I just wanted to just say how all of us watching from the outside about what y'all did is just really impactful public health work, so thank you for on behalf of all of us learning from you right now. I'm really interested in your private well testing program, and my husband, who's from the mountains of East Tennessee, says people move to the mountain because they don't want the government, up in their business, and so this idea that you said of talking to local public health departments, how has this event opened up potential channels of communication? Do you see that people may want to enter into this private well testing program now that they see how vulnerable they were without, that type of water source? If you could just maybe talk about how the forward look, how the community's been changed potentially by what's happened, and their willingness to have the government come in and test their well and permit it.
Yeah, it's been a long-standing battle with residents in North Carolina to test existing wells. So as I mentioned, as of July 1, 2008, every single new well that's been drilled in this state has been sampled for bacteria and 17 or 18 analytes and inorganic panels. So every one of those have been sampled. So we've got great data for new wells. But the number of existing wells, I have seen that number increase throughout the years. And some counties have made it easier. Wake County, for example, homeowners can do essentially what we did at direct-to-consumer side. You can go into an office, pick up your sample kit, bring it back the next day. So it's fairly easily done. I think Andy could probably hit on this more from the local level, but I do think there's more of a trust there. And I think a lot of the PFAS concerns they're hearing every day in groundwater issues has opened a lot of people's eyes that maybe my water isn't safe. And that's a difficult conversation we have with homeowners because we don't really sample for PFAS. DEQ handles a lot of that when it's around Chemours or other sites, but when we sample a well, oftentimes people think their water quality is safe. And I can say, yes, it's safe that day, the day I collected that sample, for what we analyzed for. So it's become a bigger process for educating residents. We've done a lot of work with Northeastern and other universities trying to get the word out that, you should sample annually for bacteria, every few years for metals and inorganics and potentially VOCs if you're near a site. So we've done a lot better at providing materials, but it's garnering that trust. It's getting homeowners, because as Andy said, there's some that believe when you sample their well, if it comes back with something, you're going to condemn that well. And that's not the case. We explain to everybody there's no water quality parameters for a well. This is our guidance for you, and we provide you with a health risk evaluation, what treatment options are out there, how you can limit use. But yeah, it's a battle, and it's ongoing, and we continue to try to get more existing well users to sample their wells. And storms are probably the best chance to do that.
Yeah, and I think from the standpoint of the opportunity of outreach to the community, I can speak for the 3 counties in the district I work for. And we were lucky in a lot of regards. We were not as hard hit as Buncombe and R3, although the western portions of Watauga and Ash were substantially impacted. And so I think getting out into the community, as quickly as possible, which was still kind of hard with a lot of the roads being blocked. But offering not just to test, but to chlorinate the well. The development in our area was such that when the storm hit, the well drillers in our area were 6 months to a year out. So if you wanted a new drinking water well, that was a substantial wait. Getting any kind of builder, plumber, electrician is a chore because of the demand for those services. And so we found that by us being able to go out and help people disinfect, something normally a certified plumber or certified well driller would do, it really opened the door for people to see us in a different light, that we weren't seen as the government, and we were more as a community asset there to help. And our staff would do other things. It might be if we're coming out your way, do you need us to bring anything? We can stop by the Dollar General, and we got a lot of training in that with COVID, but because we spent a lot of time running supplies to people that were in quarantine, and COVID did it hurt the public trust into public health for a number of reasons. But this was a way of building that trust back and showing, that we're here to help. When we walked into the restaurants in Boone the second and third day, the immediate was, you're the last people we want to see. We're trying to clean up. And we're like, we get that. We just want to, what do you need? Help you assess. Look at their operation. Okay, if you can get these done, yes, get open and get going. And that really kind of shocked a lot of them. And, oh, well, okay, we figured you want to lock the doors and leave. So I think the opportunity is there in these kind of crises, in these events, for public health to be seen as a help and not a hindrance, if we can take advantage of it.
And I will add to that, the biggest hindrance I've seen is many homeowners don't have the financial means to put treatment on their well. And so many of them ask the question, why sample it? And why even, it's kind of out of sight, out of mind. If I don't know it's there, not concerned about it, or they have other issues on their home, or a hole in the roof or something else that's more urgent than water treatment. So that's the biggest problem we have. And even when academia comes in and samples wells, everybody wants a solution. Don't come in and tell me I have a problem without some sort of simple, inexpensive solution. And we don't have that to provide. So that's kind of the big catch-22 when it comes to water sampling of older wells, is people just can't afford the treatment options.
One online here. Do y'all have any career advice for young professionals here interested in working for state agencies that work on things like this? We have a lot of students here.
Yeah, sure. There's, I've been in environmental health for 30 years now. It's something different every day. If you're looking for a career that you don't know what tomorrow is going to bring, and you like to problem solve, and the people that I work with, in our section and the health departments and our partners, are just the best people in the world. So, what I would recommend is if you have an interest, it's really great to start at the local level. I think you get a lot of exposure to a lot of different things in public health, and you can kind of find what your niche is, and then kind of take that into a different scope. And when you do that, or if you do that, volunteer. If there's a large event and we need assistance with whatever the issue is, X, Y, Z, then volunteer, because I think anytime you have a learning experience, you just really need to take advantage of that. So I would say just get involved. That's the main thing. Keep learning, get involved. Find a good mentor, someone you look up to and others look up to kind of help you along the way. And again, public health, environmental health, specifically for me, it's just been a great career. And like I said, I've been doing this for 30 years. I can retire, but I still enjoy what I do, and I don't have a date yet. So, if that tells you anything, then that's probably the best advertisement for this field that I can give you.
I will reiterate the fact that every day is something different. And both Larry and I have served on the RHS board that licenses environmental health specialists in the state. And we'll ask questions to every intern that comes into the field. Did you go to school for environmental health? because we have ECU, we have Western Carolina, and I would say 2 out of every 25 or 30 says yes, and the other 28 say, I didn't even know what environmental health did. I didn't know what the local health department did. And I'm one of those. I've been in environmental health 20 years now, but I started out in DEQ, and then this position kind of fell in my lap one day. And here I am 20 years later. You see a lot of people that just want to be outside, and that's why they like the on-site or wells portion, or they started out in food industry, and so they saw the inspectors come in. So it's a very rewarding field, and you can be doing it 20, 30 years, and then something new pops up that you've never seen. So it's always something new.
And from my perspective, I think, if you want a 6-figure salary and nights and weekends free, this isn't your cup of tea. If you genuinely care about other people and want to make a difference in your community, in your country, and on this planet, then this is a very rewarding. It can be very frustrating. It's not an easy job. And there are a lot of factors that are set against public health. But you know, if you are open-minded, if you've got the integrity to do what's right, regardless of what external forces are out there, and you want to make a difference, then this is where you need to be.
Hi, Alistair Cohen from Virginia Tech in Southwest Virginia. First, just thanks so much for coming and taking so much time to speak with us. I have some familiarity with the post-Helene responses in our region, Southwest, and Northeast Tennessee, and just really impressive just to see what you did in the effort and the quick response. I had a few follow-up questions, and I don't know if there's like a 2 or 3-part question, but on the well water testing, one was, I'm just curious, what was in general the kind of receptiveness or openness to the idea of shock chlorinating wells, especially for people that maybe hadn't done that before or weren't familiar? And then a follow-up question to that, for the people that did do that, were there mechanisms in place, or are there, for follow-up testing? Or did homeowners come back to you to say, great, we shock chlorinated the well, we're curious if we could retest? And then that kind of getting at, you know, the idea of wells that were damaged, but you couldn't quite tell from the surface, just to see if they're then recontaminated. And then the probably hardest question, but something we also struggle with too, for lower income households that have wells and don't have the means to repair them, so they could shock chlorinate, they're just going to get recontaminated. I'm just kind of curious, in your experience, like what resources or options or solutions have you seen are effective? And kind of more with the question that, for some households, when they get their testing results back and they see it's, you know, contaminated with E. coli, like, what does that spur as far as additional thoughts or questions, or what do we do about it? And I know that's a real hard one. We collaborate with Cooperative Extension in Virginia, and I know that's for their subsidized well water testing. That's their biggest kind of challenge spot, is the far Southwest, the more mountainous rural regions. So, thank you.
I'll try to answer some of those. Let me know if I skip one, because there were several there. As far as, I guess, I'll start with your last one. So your question about what we do if they do repeat samples and total coliform continues to exist, you know, first we'll check to see if it was properly disinfected. If the homeowner did it, we may recommend to a certified well contractor, make sure the adequate contact time. And to kind of bulk your first question into that, there were a lot of people that do not want to disinfect their well. They don't want to put chlorine in the well. We didn't make them. There's many that said, hey, I'll take a free bucket, but I don't want the disinfection material. So we're happy to analyze those results regardless. Now, for new well construction that I already mentioned, we require by rule that it be disinfected upon construction as well as upon the installation of the pump. So that's always done. But for existing wells, we can't require it. I would love to see and compare and contrast the sample results based on wells that were disinfected and that weren't. Because there's times I could make a very valid argument that the disinfection probably isn't necessary. Purge the well, you know, get enough water out of there, let it pump for a few days, and we're probably going to see very similar results, especially if you've not introduced anything new into the well. But if we continue to see positive sample results, then myself and some of my staff have well cameras. So it's not uncommon for us to go out. We'll have a certified contractor there. We'll break the well seal. We'll look in the well to see, is it a construction issue? A lot of times, if it's persistent total coliform or definitely with E. coli, there's shallow water getting in around the bottom of that casing. You know, we require 5 feet into bedrock, but if they don't seed it in bedrock, we only require 20 feet of grout at the top of the well. So anything below that, down to where the casing terminates in bedrock, there could be surface water hitting that casing, the remaining cuttings, and making its way in. So we probably camera a handful of wells a month, and then we make recommendations, whether it's treatment or putting a liner in a 6-inch well where we put a packer liner system to cut off that water, and we grout it from land surface. And I would say majority of the time, if it is due to surface water getting in that well, it resolves that issue. And what were your other questions? I know I got your first and last, but what was in the middle?
There are a couple
Andy's
there.
got more to add too.
So with respect to the shock chlorination, when we would have people come in, our first question would be, was your well inundated with water? Was it flooded? We also provided kits to anybody that wanted it, because there were people that, well, no, I wasn't, right in the flooding, but it was close. And, so, let it go out the door, let them get a peace of mind. That helps the entire community, get back. If it was inundated, those people were one of two categories. They were living there, and this is their primary home, and it was flooded, and they were very interested in getting their well treated and back online. I don't recall anybody with a flooded well not wanting to chlorinate it. I think the biggest was, look, we need to take our time, let our staff come out, and if you want to test it, it's going to come back positive. If it's flooded, but give us a day or so, we'll put you on a list, get our staff out to assess it. There may be other damage, cracked casings, several casings that were busted if there was no vent on it. The one with the casing on the ground, that entire well had filled to land surface with flood debris and sediment. So we would provide a free assessment of the well construction, at least at the well head, and then shock it, go through that process with them, and then we would offer to come out and take the resample. Because a lot of times we would have to get them to get a generator to circulate the water, because the house may have been gone, but they're trying to get a camper back in there. They're trying to get water to clean up what's left of their house, and so getting that water on was critical to them. And then the second group were the Airbnbs, second houses, and a lot of them, they kind of would come in filtered stages. But I don't think I had anybody said, no, I don't want my flooded well chlorinated. They wanted anything, any resource to get that water with a thumbs up that it's safe to drink and use and back in use.
All right. Thank you.
Please join me in thanking our panelists for presentations. Thank you so much. That was great. Oh, the microphone's on now. There's a coffee break. Enjoy the coffee break, and see you all soon.